April 9th, 2011, on his blog Behind the WEDway, urban explorer Micah Reed posts an update. While his other entries follow real events during his time as a prominent urban explorer, this post details something a little more supernatural. Disney had seen a surge in urban exploring at the time, with Reed acting as one of the pioneers of the web's interest in this subject, with this blog post coming only a few weeks before his own arrest at the parks for trespassing. Reed details his time in the early scene, placed somewhere in the late 2000s, and his interactions with a pair of professional Disney enthusiasts. Their names are not given, replaced with Disney-related pseudonyms. After years of interest in the post, Reed has continued to ignore comments or messages related to it, only ever leaving a comment under the original post. It's all very real. There's some freaky shit down there that they don't want you finding. Rest in peace, Peter. While most of his story cannot be corroborated, what's there is far more interesting as an inspection of mystery and obsession, a sense of curiosity that can get you in a far worse place than expected. A place like Disney must hide more than it seems, and you just have to go find it. With that, let's take a look behind the WEDway. Disney urbexing has become pretty rare these days. The park has gotten pretty good about keeping people out and being notoriously litigious with people who can actually get in. Disney World in Florida was the hotspot and where people had the best chance of actually finding stuff to look around in. Being so big, the company has a lot of space to just kind of leave things they don't really use anymore. The web brought a lot of attention to urbexing generally, Disney urbexing especially. The Orlando scene was brought out of the shadows those years. You used to be able to meet guys at bars in the city who lived in town and did this as an actual hobby for a good decade before then. Little groups of enthusiasts and superfans who moved down here to be closer to the parks or work at them who took large amounts of their time off finding little places to explore on the huge property. There was a guy who always tried to convince us that he carved his name into the Yeti at the top of Everest. He'd carry around a little weird braid of what was supposedly the thing's hair as proof. Everyone wanted to make big claims about the access they had or what they'd gotten close to. Other guys liked to pass around a tape they made of people going down Space Mountain on a night vision camera, during park hours no less. There were these two friends who worked at the park somewhere backstage and gotten fired like 2 weeks into their job for a bunch of little incidents. Stealing hats on pirates, hiding in the heating chamber on Test Track, stealing the real movie props on the Great Movie Ride. I think they just liked to steal, really. What little time they did spend working at Disney gave them just enough bits of knowledge to have some of the best access in the whole scene at the time. I'd rather not give their names and implicate them in more shit, so I'll call them Peter and Dreamfinder. Peter was from Orlando and had an uncle who worked in Imagineering. He was a season pass holder. At the time, he is currently suffering through a lifetime ban, and had spent most of his adult life in the parks. He knew where pretty much everything was, especially the off-limits stuff, knew every background ambient loop by heart, and had a little personal relationship with probably hundreds of cast members in every little sector of park operations who always owed him some kind of favor. Dreamfinder was pretty much nothing like Peter, even though they got on so well. He was from Kansas and had come down here for the college program before getting knocked out pretty quickly. He was a camera guy, knew everything about whatever shitty point and shoot you showed him. I'd gone over to their place once, and he had this whole professional video editing rig he assembled from junk stores and Goodwills. He would produce videos from the footage they'd get on the frequent trips into the depths of the parks. He was a quiet guy, probably somewhere on the spectrum, and probably knew more than Peter, though he'd never show it. These guys were pillars of this little weirdo community, and most people knew of them if you asked them about them. These videos must have sold tens of dollars worth of copies, and they moved through the scene like celebrities. Who was I in all this? Pretty much no one. Another camera guy who liked to explore the abandoned sawmills of the Pacific Northwest. I got hooked on it after a good friend from Anaheim brought me backstage on Splash Mountain when I was in my late teens. It's a weird feeling that I probably share with other more serious criminals, but I just got a little kick out of doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. I made the move out of curiosity for the larger parks, and a little photojournalism gig I got from an online news site, which I took a significant pay cut for to be closer to the parks. My Anaheim friend also wanted a place to crash for free when he would take trips to the park, which I was more than happy to offer. Peter and Dreamfinder spent their Saturdays from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. at a local 24-hour internet cafe, usually spending their nights from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. in their little crevices of the park. Dreamfinder also worked in the cafe. I'm not sure if Peter worked. After a few encounters and stories of their legendary local status, I'd make an early morning of visiting them and have a shitty cup of coffee while they relayed to me that night's events. It was a small room underneath a residential building you'd have to go downstairs to get into. It was kind of wet smelling with burnt coffee aromas almost masking it, but not completely. They had a little neon sign that read, 24/7, night owls only, next to the window that was usually off, probably in the hopes of driving people away. They treated the place like their little office, where other enthusiasts would make appointments to come and speak with them about buying a tape or a copy of the Exxon private lounge key or something. Peter liked to run things like that. I think he wanted people to come hat in hand to ask him for things. He also couldn't help but brag about anything he thought would impress one of us freaks, ready to recount any of the little illegalities he had committed hours previously. He never had any kind of deal with me about coming down there, but I'd try and wring these stories out of him with these two wrinkles of his character. I'd step inside and he'd rotate himself around in the desk chair and greet me with a smug line. I'd sit there and really earnestly ask him for a map of the utilidors or something, and all his stories would come pouring out. Dreamfinder would stay behind the counter and act as footnotes for whatever he was talking about, usually tapping away on the computer at the same time. There was one morning where we got to talking about Small World and how annoying it was. Dreamfinder had a particular hatred of the ride and didn't like doing things in there after hours after they found out that the old rumors about it had been true. They left the thing on all the time. It never stopped. The way that Disney composed music for dark rides like that had a way of not having a beginning or end, more like they wanted to make it hard for a person riding to recognize it. Each room had its own track that blends together with the previous room and the start and end of its own track. It was like a shepherd's tone, always increasing. Peter relayed this to me as Dreamfinder averted his ears from the conversation. He told me about the last time they had gone in there, and mainly to tell me about these dolls that were hanging above the divider sections. When you go in between show scenes in the ride, there's a short section of darkness between the scenes where the boats pass through. Peter said that they had found a way onto a catwalk above the ride to get a better view. To get there, you got off the boat in one of the sections and took an old exit door out, which leads backstage where they keep the enclosed ladders to maintain the lights. When you got up there, he said there were a bunch of dolls hanging from strings. Not really anything calling attention to it, nothing for people to look at, just hanging there in the darkness. He wasn't sure where they had come from. He said they may have been cannibalized from some lesser seen sections of the ride, but they were there. I called bullshit. In my couple of years of urbexing at Walt Disney World, I'd yet to find anything like that. If he thought it was there on purpose, he was lying. If it was some rogue cast member, it would have been gone in a day. He assured me it was real, that he had seen it a few times, and of course he had proof. He flicked his head at Dreamfinder, who leaned down behind the counter and came out with a big book of CDs. He flopped it down on the desk and flipped through the full pages of discs with dates and names and the little filing numbers they had devised for their database of backstage images. He got to the near end and slipped the dated disc out of its plastic sleeve. It was from about 10 years ago. I had no idea how long they had been doing this at this time. Peter popped it in the drive. He scrolled through about 50 images before he came to one set labeled SW Strings. Sure enough, it was real. Overexposed in an artificial flash, the dolls hung from fishing lines off the rafters in the dark sections of the ride. The rosy paint gleamed back at the lens. You could see Dreamfinder's New Balance in the bottom right. Peter looked at me while I looked at it. He wanted some kind of reaction. Pulled my eyebrows up in faux shock and nodded like I was impressed. He seemed satisfied, for a moment at least, before turning to Dreamfinder. They both knew what he wanted to tell me about. Dreamfinder said something about never wanting to hear or see anything from that place again before storming off to the back room in anger. Peter waited until he was out of earshot to start telling me his wildest story yet. He sprung up and went to grab a binder of pamphlets he had collected over the years. Every so often, when you entered the park, you'd be given a little advertisement for a new attraction or show happening that night. Peter had kept pretty much every one of these little pamphlets for what seemed like 20 years, going back through the layers to get to the thing he wanted to show me. A yellowed little sheet from the early 90s. It was an ad for something new coming to Epcot in 94. He told me he had only ever heard about this new thing this one time. It's only mentioned here, never again in any other official media. It's not oriented to any of the pavilions by its design or images, just that something new was coming to Epcot. He wanted to know more about it, so we went and asked somebody at the guest-facing info center. He brought the ad and just asked the lady behind the desk at the International Gateway what it was. She looked at it for a second and had nothing for him. He tried again at the World Showcase info desk. Nothing. When he finally asked at the Future World desk, the guy behind the counter looked at them weirdly. He told Peter that there had never been anything like that sent out officially, and that he would bring it back to someone to take a closer look at it. But he said it in a kind of knowing way. Peter didn't like his look and asked for it back. The guy refused, and Peter eventually reached over the counter and took it from him. The guy jumps up and calls out to one of the more security-looking cast members who was a little ways away. The security guy jogs over, Peter knows him, and he gets to leave with the pamphlet. When he got home that night, he decided to do some more research. Disney had a system where they'd place photographers around the parks to take photos of guests near landmarks and photo op spots at almost all the parks. Digital cameras have made this a pretty simple process, but the system dates back further than you think. Disney Photographic Services had its own building somewhere in the park complex at the time, where they would develop pictures taken around the park by photographers and send them to their respective guests' hotels for their checkout dates. Totally free of charge, by the way. They'd get some info from you when they took the negative, and they'd send it over to the photo service building to be developed. Then, using the little known and utilized inter-resort mail service, it would be sent out to each hotel. Peter told me that they had an issue with people not picking up their photos as they left, or with them not being sent out. Enough that they had a massive library of photos of random people from around the parks that they wanted to get rid of before the old photo lab closed. Before it shut down, they digitized the massive catalog into an indexable server that people could browse online. It was something they never really advertised or told anybody about, but it was there for anyone to look through. Peter had a massive local backup of all of these images, which he would use as a resource for his personal history of the park. He was always talking about a book he was going to write about the place. Tangent aside, Peter had gone through images from around 92 to try and see if there may have been some kind of in-park advertising for this unfinished attraction. In the Epcot section of the database for that year, he had one image. It was a Grady film photo of a woman and a younger child standing on the balcony in the land. It was mostly just them posing, but he tapped his finger on a spot in the lower left near where the escalators brought you down. There was a sign on the wall, hung over an unseen section that is now a bathroom. The sign was unreadable for the most part in this one. He flicked his wrist and scanned through the database for a later date, finding another one in the land, this time with a better view of the sign. Again, mostly another family photo, but you could see what it said. "We'll be here before you know it. Symbiosis with the land, coming summer 1994. There were a few characters on the sign, maybe a guy in a safari or cowboy hat, some animal-looking things too. Peter looked at me again for approval. I nodded a bit. He traced around for another image and opened it, this time a family sitting in the farmer's market quick service with a super clear view of the sign. It was a guy in a cowboy hat and a couple of animals around him. He closes it and shoves himself away from the desk. He leans over with his elbows on his knee. He says that he thinks it was some kind of proposed ride about humans and their relationship with living creatures to play off Living with the Land's focus on plant life and gardening. The picture had the area walled off and everything. They probably started to actually build something there before everything had gotten closed up. After finding the images and being generally weirded out by the whole thing, he made his way over to the land. The area under this where the sign had been was now bathrooms, but there was a cast member door all the way at the end of the wall, a double door. He talked with some of the other cast members he knew who worked at the Garden Grill about borrowing a key. This was back when people inside the parks were generally okay with what he did. Later that night, Dreamfinder and him camped out in the theater and watched Circle of Life for a few hours. They made their way over to the door and actually got in. It was then he finally broke eye contact with me and pulled his lips into his mouth. He scooted back up to the desk and flipped through the discs, pulling out something more recent. Symbiosis was written on the front. Opening with the password, he scrolled through the image files, opening them one by one. Unlike the others, nothing happened. They opened to blank windows, each one with a corresponding error message. When they go on expeditions, they each pack 2 cameras, usually digital. Dreamfinder's images had come out similarly. Their proof had been corrupted. Dreamfinder hadn't actually left. He was standing on the other side of the doorway. He walked out with 4 cameras and his little repair kit. He brushed the keyboard aside from the adjacent desk and started to furiously unscrew and take apart each of the cameras. He'd get down to the sensor and switch to a new one, leaving a pile of tiny screws and plastic shells all over the desk. As soon as he finished with each, he got up and walked away. I leaned in closer to see what he wanted to show me. Each of the sensor chips had been burnt out. You could actually see a little soot right in the center. Peter looked at me again for a reaction. I chuckled. They told me so much at this point that this was probably what they wanted to build me up to. Get me so involved with actual stuff they do to make me believe in this ghost bullshit. This was probably the last test to see if someone was totally bought into their stupid Disney trespassing operation. I was tired. It was around 4 a.m. and I had a deadline on Monday that I hadn't started yet. I just kind of said that I had to go and then I'd see them around. He looked pretty disappointed, like I was the next prospect for the king of hanging out in amusement parks. Dreamfinder shouted goodbye from the back. I was going to sleep for a few hours before getting up and editing photos before the work week started. Around 8, I got a call. I had never given either of them my number, but it was from the cafe. Peter wanted to meet me at Epcot that afternoon. He'd pull some strings and ask someone to give me away into the old area. I had been creating my own little database of backstage photos as well, taking them every chance I had gotten. I was nowhere near as daring as those two, but I definitely got around. I had done a couple of hotspots when I first moved here and with some of the other guys. Discovery Island, Cranium Command, People Mover, Mickey's Ward, Tomorrowland Command. From there I mostly did my own stuff, taking hints from Peter and Dreamfinder about places most people hadn't seen yet. Even though I was kind of sick of him, Peter always had proof. The way he talked about it, it seemed a little too real to be a total bluff. This place had to exist, at least I hoped for the sake of exploration. If there really was no photo yet, I could make those tens of dollars. There was also a website gaining popularity at the time called YouTube, which meant I could post any video I took at the same time, which was probably more interesting to me than the money. I mulled this over as Peter waited for me to agree, which I think he knew I would. I spent the morning arming myself with an entire arsenal of cameras. I had my 2 crappy point-and-shoots, a mid-tier DSLR from work, and a film camera I got from my high school graduation. I also packed along my Hi8. It was a bit of a beast, but was still the best video camera I had at the time. I also duct taped a mini flashlight I had to the body of the video camera, just in case it was darker than expected. If you get close enough to the parks, you can find hotels that have shuttles to drop you off right outside the gate. I could save on gas and not have to pay for parking. So, around noon, I made my way on Orlando Public Transit to the Best Western on International Drive, where they had free buses to any park. I got on with supreme confidence, a skill you learn early in your urbexing career, and reviewed each of my cameras for integrity. There was a blackout on my season pass that day, but my special Orlando Press Pass actually got me in. You could use it once a week, and I'd been accumulating days on it for months at this point, so I could get in pretty much whenever I wanted. He said that we should spend some time in the park together before we met with his secret source, so we met up at Project Tomorrow and he gave me his own little private tour of the place. We stopped at pretty much every pavilion and did like every ride too. He had a story about everything, where he hid on this ride, where there were infrared cameras on this spot, what the best showcase food spot was, who was working at each popcorn stand that week. It was strange to see them in this kind of mood. He almost always acted like a big-time criminal who could break into any one of these buildings and take secret backstage photos of anything he wanted. He had a lot of respect for the place in the day. Just kind of taking in every piece of design the place had. That might have been where that attitude came from. I think he just loved it so much that he had to break into it at night to spend more time inside. The day was fading and we had already watched O Canada twice, so we decided to finish up at Ellen's Energy. It's one of the longest rides at the park, and the heat was killing both of us at this point. It was dark and cool and almost empty, so we got a chance to decompress and talk a little bit. At least I wanted to talk to him, but he seemed more interested in the ride, even though it kinda sucked. We walked into the big theater room and sat down. He stayed completely upright, and I took a moment to lean back in the seat for a few minutes. The darkness and coolness may have caused me to rest my eyes for a couple of minutes. I'm not sure if Peter really cared if I was there though, because he was weeping by the time I woke up during the finale. I just looked at him, staring at the flyover images of the Grand Canyon and listening to Bill Nye give his spiel, crying just a little bit. He finally noticed me and wiped his eyes as the ride came back to the theater room. I guess there was a reason to come here, because he pulled me aside as everybody left, as the woman operating the ride walked over to us. She greeted Peter and looked over her shoulder as she hands him a small key before darting off back to her operator podium to welcome the next batch of guests. We look at each other for a second and leave outside to the fence surrounding the showcase lagoon. We caught the tail end of illuminations as the fireworks were going off. We watched for a minute before he lowered his head to mumble something. I don't know if it was directed at me or not, but the fireworks covered it up. He picked his face back up and handed me the key. He told me to be in and out and to lock everything up before I left, which would have to be late to make sure the cleaning crew had left. I was surprised he wasn't coming with me, but he said he had something else going on that night, which I knew wasn't true. I walked along the Future World side of the park as hundreds of people trailed their way back to the parking lots. The sliding doors of the land had already locked for the night, but the key seemed to work for them as well. The restaurants and rides and theaters were all closed already. I'd worn my fake cast member badge I bought from some guy online just in case. It was quiet in there. I could really only hear the whirring of the garden grill slowly rotating. The hot air balloon suspended from the ceiling swayed a little bit in the ventilated air. I walked down the escalator to a small, extended hallway. The double doors sat at the very back, past a set of bathrooms and water fountains. I fired up the video camera and pointed it down the hall. Peter forgot to tell me that they had put stroller parking right in front of the entrance. I wheeled some out of the way and made my way to the door. It was go away green, even the handle. The lock was painted over as well, sliding the key through a thin coat that blocked the tumbler. I almost can't push it in completely, but I move past something inside the lock and it clicks into place. The double doors open, falling inwards into a deeper hallway. It's dark, but a set of motion lights crackle on. The walls are painted to look like an expansive pasture. The hallway wasn't as clear as I expected it to be. More strollers parked down the hall on the left side, assorted trash bins and ashtrays on the left. I had been taking sporadic photos of all of this. These lights were definitely the work lights, harsh fluorescence that overexposed everything. I continued down the hall. I wrapped around a corner, then another corner before I came to another set of double doors. These ones were painted like tree bark, trying to seem wooden. There was a dot on the floor with numbers for people to stand on when they came out to this point. probably to assign seats for whatever was beyond the doors. A cast member podium was at the front and had switches and knobs. A keyhole on the panel with the on-off. I tried to force my key in, but it obviously wasn't a match. I stand back up at the podium and notice the theater door switch. Pressing it, the tree bark doors open up inwards into a large theater room. At least that's what it looks like from the podium. There's no lights on inside. I approach the threshold of the theater. Almost all the lights stop in the first row of seats. I turn the flashlight on and scan around the theater. It's much larger than expected. A crazy amount of seats for an attraction this size. The theater itself almost looks like Country Bear Jamboree, but instead of a lodge, it looks like the inside of a barn. A light purple curtain came across the stage and blocked what I think was a screen. I approached the stage, expecting there to be a flat base I could walk along and get a better view of the seating, but there wasn't. The stage was totally false and was really just a pit that things were pulled up from. I could look down into it, and to my surprise, a series of animatronics lay waiting to be documented. The side of the stage led up to a drop with a small stepladder to lower yourself into the staging area. This is where my memory gets hazy. Each of the animatronics had been stripped down to their bones, solenoids visible, hydraulic tubes running up their metal frames. What was left to see was the face, each with little levers for eyebrows and lips and little eyelids that hadn't rotten away yet. As I recorded each with my right hand, I took small snapshots with my left. Some had their hands raised in a wave, some looked at the floor. There was probably 6 in total down there. I tried to take a look at each. Each one was almost the same. One was bigger than the others, I think. Little faces and cartoonish teeth and metal endoskeletons are all I can recall. Plastic eyes staring at the wall, joints rusting and hydraulic fluid stagnating. There was a smell, the best thing I can pull back from my mind. It was like the early Florida mornings, like dewy grass. I stood near the other end and got a photo of the last figure on stage right. It was like the others, silently living in total darkness. I moved to leave, but I took one last look. Its eyes had moved slightly, maybe enough to look right at me. The plastic eyes with a little false highlight of yellow. I stared back at it. Nothing changed. I checked the other figures. Nothing changed. Something moved in the dark, or maybe it didn't. It's hazy. Something comes over me. I know I should be leaving now. I'd spent too long here. Somebody would find me sooner or later. When I got back for the door, it had been closed. There were no handles. Everything was controlled by the board at the podium. I think from there, I ran back down to the stage to try and find some other way out. I stepped down the ladder onto the stage. The dewy smell comes back again. I push deeper into the guts of the ride, deeper into the small hallways behind the stage. I jog a little bit and snap photos of pictures of what I see. Old ride vehicles, animatronics, costumes hanging like bodies, dusty plastic toys, felts, fibers. The hallway goes on and on. A corridor, curtains, glossy pages, smoke machines, food stands, metal fragments of a world surviving in the dark. Maybe another set of steps behind me. Maybe not. Old scents fill my mind. Something cries out from a dark spot in the carpet. Pipes leak onto the wall. A memory of a world as it was. I was sitting on a bench carved out of concrete near the monorail track. Someone in a uniform walks down the long pathway waving a flashlight back and forth. She asks me to leave. I'm on the bus back to the city. My camera sputters to life. The Hyatt was nothing but a mess of static. I could recall it all just slightly. Peter didn't pick up the phone. Dreamfighter hadn't been in the cafe. I had some pictures to get ready that morning. A few weeks later, Peter wanted to meet me at the park again. He was in Tomorrowland eating at Cosmic Rays. He told me that they changed his show tape last month, and that he never got a recording of it. He wanted to know what happened that night. I wanted to know where he was. He answered first. He told me a messy story of other places like that in the park. Places that no one talked about or would acknowledge. Places that you weren't allowed to photograph or record. He talked on and on about where they went and what they held, but I had no interest. He told me about the collective unconscious and shadows and what this place was meant to do, but I didn't care. He was a troubled guy. Everyone around him knew. Everything he said was developed in a mind lost in the fantasy of a world that hid more than it did. He wanted me to come with him to MGM to take a look at another place like that. He wanted another witness to confirm what he saw. I said nothing and ate my burger and listened to the alien man sing a song. He said that there were ways of staying in the park for days on end without anybody finding you. I continued to say nothing. I brought something with me, something he'd be more interested in than me. A roll of film survived. I hadn't developed it yet, though. I wanted nothing to do with this place for a while, nothing to do with what they were up to. When he finally caught up to the words spilling out of him, he asked what I had seen there. I really didn't know what to tell him. I formed some kind of description. He stared at me as I mumbled it out. I left after that. I didn't really know what to say to him. That was one of the last times I saw him. This was around the same time that motion sensors were placed all around the parks. Peter and Dreamfinder's methods weren't as helpful as they were before. They were both caught in the coming months. I see Dreamfinder around sometimes. Nobody's seen Peter around since his ban. He's probably buried in some slot behind a show stage or hiding in the ball pit on Space Mountain. I rarely go to the parks these days and have plans to move out in the coming years. That place is too bogged up with baggage to be healthy for anyone anymore. I'll head back someday. Just maybe not today.